The question is what does it mean to sin? And I bet it doesn't mean what you think it does. Let's dive in. A great place to go is the book of Romans, Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 23. It says this, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for the images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Paul is talking about those people who had a knowledge of God, even just by looking at creation and knowing there should have been a creator. And he says they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. And a lot of times when I've read this verse in the past, I thought it was saying, well, they stopped worshiping God and they started worshiping these other things. But that is not what Paul says. Paul says they exchanged the glory of the immortal God. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does it mean to exchange the glory of God for images and creatures? And another good place to go is just one page later for me in Romans, through 2 pages later, Romans 3 and verse 23. It says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Whenever I was told, what does it mean to sin? I was always told growing up, it means to miss the mark. The mark is God's perfection. And when you don't meet that mark, you are falling short. You are sinning. And I get that. That makes sense. I'm not saying that is wrong, but notice how Paul talks about sinning. He says, for all have sinned. And he doesn't say, and have missed the mark, and haven't been perfect, and haven't been able to keep all of God's rules. He doesn't say that. Look at the passage. It says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does it mean to exchange the glory of God for something else? What does it mean to fall short of the glory of God? Because that seems like a different question than just missing the mark of perfection. And so we go back to Romans chapter 1. And actually, we need to go back even further than that. We need to go back to Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 26 and 27. And this is what it says. Then God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds, and over the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all of earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. I actually grew up right outside of Nashville, Tennessee. And one of the things that Nashville is known for is the Parthenon. And they have an exact replica of what the Parthenon looks like in Athens, Greece. And everything is to the exact scale. And when you go in the front, there's these huge doors that open up. And right when you look in, you see this huge statue of the goddess Athena. And the reason they had these statues there is these temples were almost like a cosmic crossroads where the divine and the human met. This was supposed to be a place where the god or the goddess could dwell. And when people would go in, they would look at that statue, and that statue was supposed to say something about that god or goddess. And so you look at the statue of Athena and you say, wow, this thing is huge. Their god must be really big and powerful. And the goddess was thought to have been covered in gold or gold leaf or something like that. And they thought, this goddess must be extremely valuable. And then they would have looked at the spear in her hand and thought she must be a warrior god. She was holding the goddess Nike in her hand. That goddess Nike is, to give you a sense of scale, was 5 feet tall. The goddess Nike was the goddess of victory. And this is what Athena is holding in her hand. So this goddess must be a goddess who's not just a warrior, but who can win. A serpent was right next to Athena. They thought this goddess must be wise because the serpent was known as wise and cunning. And so you look at the statue, and the statue was supposed to reflect what that god or goddess was like. This word for image or statue is the word in Hebrew, salim. And so when you read at Genesis chapter 1, the same word is being used. Verse 27, so God created man in his own salim, in his own image. You see, when God created the world, he didn't want to just make a temple and put a statue or image of him in it. Instead, what he decided to do was create human beings and put his image inside of us. When people look at us, we're supposed to be a reflection of what our God is like. We're supposed to reflect God's glory. This is our job as human beings. And so when we fall short of reflecting God's image to others, we are falling short of the glory of God. This is what sin is. Yes, it might be missing the mark of perfection, but so much more than that, sin is actually failing to do what we were created to do. We are failing to live up to the most basic meaning of what it means to be human, which is to reflect the image of God. And so then you go back to Romans 1 and verse 23, and it says, they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man. That same word being used here, this word images. They had the image of God inside themselves. They were supposed to reflect that image and God's glory to others. But instead, they decided they didn't want to do the job that God had created us to do. But instead, they wanted to worship images. They wanted to reflect images of others because we become like what we worship. If money becomes the most important thing to us, then that is what we're going to be thinking about. That's what's going to be on our mind and on our heart. And we're going to be a person who loves money. We become like what we worship. And Paul says that they decided to worship birds and animals and creeping things. And so that's what they were reflecting. They exchanged God's glory and instead exchanged it for the images of these other things. This is what it means to sin, is to failing to live up to the purpose for which we were created.